Alrighty, hello everyone. Today we'll be starting our part 5 for our Pong project. Uh, we're just gonna continue moving on throughout our Pong project, rewriting certain parts to try and make it better, obviously, or just have fun with it, honestly. That's the main goal, just to have fun with this project. So if you want to know where we left off, the code bit is all on GitHub. So if you ever want to access the code, then just remember that all you have to do is just go to this website, and then choose the correct program, and then just copy it over. Right now we are going to be on pongrewrite.py, and Pong Rewrite is the one that we will continue to be updating as we move forward throughout this course. So today we're finally going to be able to move on to our keying over here. So we have our key down and key up, and obviously right now we have two paddles, and we immediately can notice, alright, well, this one we can see is not actually essentially accounting for both paddles at the moment. Each one has to have K up, K down, W and S. This is for the controls. W and S go up and down for the left paddle, and the up and down arrows go up and down for the right paddle. Likewise for key up, it checks for both paddle 1 and paddle 2, and if we are to add more paddles or something like that, we just have to keep on copying and pasting this piece of code, and that would look pretty ugly. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called create a helper method. This helper method is essentially just a mini method. Oftentimes when we write a method, we can have a certain idea that we want to follow, but it's not often entirely possible or practical to write out that entire idea inside one singular method. So instead what happens is people will go ahead and write a helper method, and what this helper method does is that it essentially allows you to split up the code into smaller, more manageable bits. In this case, obviously the code isn't that long, but this is just to teach you the idea of a helper method. So the helper method name, it's not like it's anything special or anything that we just add a helper at the end. It's completely just for our own visual purposes, I guess. We can name it anything. We can name it like A, X, it really doesn't matter as long as we know what it is. So once we go ahead and we create this helper method, we want to know what direction we want to go in. Well, we're just trying to go ahead and capture the event of whether or not it's up or down. So we need to think about this a little bit. So I'll just paste this for here for now. Obviously we have our our two velocities here, so we might need to be able to access that, because we notice that there is a difference here. So once again, in our previous methods, we just go ahead and delete that, and we just put paddle velocity as one of the parameters. And of course, once it's set, there's nothing you actually really need to do about that. But what we do need to do is think about it. Alright, so obviously there is a little problem here. This is only accounting for key up and key down at the moment. That's not what we want. So what we're going to do is instead create two more parameters. This one's just going to be called up, and the next one is just going to be called down. So this up is going to be entered in as whatever key is going to be assigned as up, and this one is going to be assigned as whatever key is assigned as down. What do I mean by this? Well, if I'm to go ahead and call this method, right, key down helper, right, And obviously I put in my events, the paddle velocity, but then we go and we have up and down. I'm going to be going ahead and putting key up and key down so I can check for these matches inside these if statements. That's all I'm doing over here. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So once I go ahead and I check that, I can go ahead and determine, alright, everything looks good. I obviously have to check if it works. So now what we can go ahead and do is we can delete all this code over here, and instead what we have to do is simply just call our method, key down helper. So what we do is we call key down helper, and we have multiple paddles, so we do need to do it for both of them. So the event is always going to be passed through. First we're going to go ahead and be doing paddle 1, and then our up is going to be called key up, and our down is going to be called key down, just like that. So if you're wondering, like, oh, what is this K up, K down? I don't believe it's in here. Yeah. So it's something that's part of Python. Each key obviously has a name. And when you go ahead and you kind of go through the different letters, the different keys on your keyboard, some of them are pretty self-explanatory, like every single letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all those. Those are pretty easy to follow along because, well, they're obvious. But then there's ones, like the shift key, the enter key, and, as a programmer, people like to keep things concise, and they won't always go ahead and, type out the entire thing. And in this case, what they do is they actually go ahead and, give it their own name. And it's important to know these names, so obviously you can go ahead and Google it if you don't actually know what is going on. So now that we kind of know, all right, well, that's how it happens, I guess, because that's an important thing to know. We can go ahead and write the second part of the method, our key down helper, calling it a second time. This is going to be for the paddle 2 velocity, and we're going to go ahead and write key except we'll just put key up and key down for now, and then we have to look, all right, well, this is paddle 2, it's different. How's it different? Well, we actually have different keys. So it looks like I actually messed this up. This one is actually W, and this one is S in comparison to up and down. So I switched them up. A good way to check it is just look through the rest of your code. Typically when you write it for the first time, you'll always keep it consistent. And if you don't remember, there's two ways of doing it. One way is just, it's a 50-50 chance. Try and guess it, and if it's the wrong way, then you just switch it around. The other way is looking through your code, trying to understand what's going on, and then copying the part that's is right. Obviously, that way's a little harder, but it's also less likely to break your code. But at this level, breaking your code for a small mistake isn't that bad. It's essentially easily recoverable from. So now that we've gone ahead and determined, all right, so we've written our helper methods here. We want to do the exact same thing for the key up event. So again, these helper methods I'm making don't really shorten your code at this level here. And the main reason why they don't shorten your code is because, we don't have too many objects. We don't have too many paddles floating around. However, if we were to have, like 10 paddles, right? If we were to make the board super big, 5-on-5, suddenly our small piece of code here would have to be multiplied by 10 times, and that's 40 lines of code in comparison to 10. Shortening it by 30 does a lot for your program. 30 lines is from here all the way to up here, so you can just imagine how much it can shorten your code in the long run if we are to make this a more extensive game, or if you want to go ahead and make your own, make the size bigger, add more paddles, add more balls. All of this is just to make that easier for you in the future. So what we go ahead and we do is we just go ahead and copy the code here, paste that here, and we still do need the same parameters. We're going to need our paddle velocity, we're going to need our up and down keys. So we go ahead, we make sure that we have everything the right way, obviously, and just check everything, just make sure that everything is good. And once we've determined, alright, these ones aren't changing any values, everything else seems the same, then what we can do is we can start calling it. Since we've already made a similar call up here, we can just go ahead and copy that, and go ahead and paste that here, paste that twice, and we can make this paddle 2, and this one is going to be key up, and this one is going to be key down. Now, another important note in these is that it's important to get down your velocity, or your uppercase or lowercase. This is a lowercase, this is a lowercase, and these are both uppercase. Case is extremely important when you program. It can cause you a lot of problems and headaches if you have inconsistent cases everywhere. Program is just one of those things that it tends to be kind of strict in this fashion. So now we can go ahead and transfer over, and we can actually go ahead and run the code and see, does this work? Did our change prove to be successful? And at the moment it seems like no, the keys are not working at the moment. Now there is obviously no need to panic or anything like that. We do of course want to look back at our original code. How do we do this? Well, since I didn't save a copy on here, what we can do is we can just go into our GitHub, and we can go into our Python repository, and we can access our Python rewrite, with our Pong rewrite. So once again, we look at this entire thing, we want to go to whatever part of the code is relevant for us. So we go all the way down, and we can find our key down and key up. And we have to look at it, and we have to go, what went wrong, right? Because obviously something went wrong, and we want to figure out what in the world happened. So I'll give you guys 1 second, to kind of look at this version, and then another minute to go ahead and look at the other version before I go ahead and explain my thought process. Alright, so hopefully that gave you guys enough time to kind of think through, or at least examine the two different bits of code. So the main difference here is we have 2 times the number of methods. Obviously when we have this kind of situation, problems can arise. So we want to start from our key down method. We go ahead, let's try and line this up with the top. That's good enough, I guess. So we've defined key down. We didn't change this, and up to here it's the exact same. We go back here into our original code, and we can look. All right, so obviously this is still the same, so it looks like we're still looking good, right? Now we look at our second part, and we see if event.key is equal to key up, then the velocity is set at -8. Well, what does this mean? We need to figure out why is this happening, and could we have done something wrong here? Well, what's happening here is essentially the paddle is when you go ahead and you press the up key, in this case as the third parameter here, if you press W or up, then theoretically speaking the paddle should go -8 pixels per second. And when you go ahead and you when you look at a monitor, you look at a canvas you create, it's essentially like a coordinate plane almost. Each pixel has its own coordinates. And it's special in that as you go towards the right, your coordinates will increase, and as you go down, your coordinates will also increase. In this case, our paddle is going up, so the coordinates will decrease. Since our paddle can only move up or down, it can't move left or right, that is something that we need to make we need to make sure that people know, yes, okay, it's going in the correct direction. So we've confirmed that. We've also confirmed, all right, else if event.key is equal to down, then paddle velocity is then set to 8. Now we come back to our code here, and we look for this and we go, all right, so that all seems good. It follows the logic completely, and we just got to make sure, all right, are these controlling the right things? Well, up goes to 2, down goes to 2. We look at this, all right, up goes to 2, down goes to 2, all right, but one thing we notice is, it's flipped. So in case you don't know it, you can just go ahead and do it, no harm in trying. And once we go ahead and do this, we now want to look, all right, so we've analyzed the key down helper. We can't really find any problems quite yet. So next thing we want to do is analyze our key up. So in key up, we go ahead, we look at this again. All right, define key up, and goes through there, and then it goes event.key in kw or ks. So in, what does in mean? Well, in English, obviously in means whether or not this is located inside a list. In this case, it's the list of kw or ks. Now, is there anything special about this list that needs to be analyzed? So we can notice, all right, if the event is in either of these, then it can go ahead and just easily just set it. So it will go ahead and reset the velocities. And if we look at where key up is used, if we just go ahead and Control F key up, we can see that there's another if statement here, and this if statement is actually just going ahead and calling key up and key down based on whether or not there's a key pressed, right? And the event is obviously whatever is happening on your keyboard. So in case you're confused, like, oh, this seems kind of similar to this, right? Well, that's because the event is actually searching for different things based on where it's called. So we've determined, all right, we want to go ahead and we want to check back with our original code here. And our code, so obviously this part still remains the same, and we still have our velocity for paddle 2 arranged with key up and key down. So again, I think they put up and down first, so we can go, actually no, they put up and down second in this one. So we will just, keep the order that we originally had that was working, because we never want to, initiate something that doesn't work. And we see, all right, well, now that we've gone ahead and called this, right? Well, there's something that we want to look at a little bit further. We notice that it actually goes ahead and changes paddle velocity. Whereas in these ones, it will change the actual velocity themselves. Paddle 2, paddle 1 gets set as that. And paddle 1 velocity and paddle 2 velocity are both global variables, meaning that they can be accessed anywhere in the program. Also meaning that they will be used everywhere in the program. Whereas paddle velocity is native to only these specific methods, wherever we define them, right? And in this case, they're defined inside the parameters, right over here. So now that we notice this, well, how do we fix this? Well, there's this powerful thing known as returning a value. And what returning a value does is essentially it will go ahead and give you a certain value to inputs as a result of calling the method. And in this case, we can go ahead and just return paddle velocity. And what that does is essentially, now that we go ahead and we actually return something, we can set this as paddle 2 velocity is now equal to key down helper, and for this one we can set paddle 1 velocity is equal to key down helper for that specific one as well. So obviously it won't work if we don't change both of them, so we do want to do this for this one as well. We will go ahead and return our paddle velocity here. And now that we go ahead and we've determined that, we now want to go ahead and store them both into the right velocities as well. In this case, this one's going to be paddle 1 velocity, and in this case, it is going to be paddle 2 velocity. We can go ahead and save it, and now we can run our program. Let me just make sure you guys can see it. Yes, you can. And we run it, and we see that it's working again. Obviously there's some errors in another part of the program that we will have to fix later on. I believe that's something that we changed before, and we can see, oh, paddle velocity is actually returning something that it's not supposed to be returning. And the reason for that is because when we go ahead and we define it here, it actually goes ahead and just resets the value, and that's not something that the program is entirely happy with. So for now, I will go ahead and let you guys look over the code here, try and make sure you guys understand what just happened. It can be a little hard to understand at first because it is a little abstract. So I'll give you guys maybe 1 to 2 minutes to try and understand it. Alright, so hopefully you guys were able to semi-understand what was going on. Now we want to go back, run the program, and we want to get the error here. And we can see the error that we get is unsupported operand type for plus or equal int and tuple. That is in line 106. Cool thing, about PyCharm, you can go ahead and highlight lines like this. So the next time you go ahead, you scroll through it, and say you have something else to do, you come back to the program and you go, oh yeah, that was the line I need to look at a little more closely. Well, it turns out there's actually two more lines we want to take a little bit of closer look at. Lines 181, where it is originally called, as well as line 80, which is somewhere in the second time it is called inside the draw canvas, using the canvas as a parameter. So this is obviously where the error actually occurs. So it says integer and tuple cannot be added. So we can assume we didn't change paddle pause at all. We only changed paddle velocity, meaning that somewhere in there we got an error based on the paddle velocity, right? Well, what error did we exactly get? So it says tuple. And for those of you who are wondering what is a tuple, well, simply put, it's not an integer. And in this case, we want it to be an integer, since the only two values that we ever set our velocity to is 8 and 0. However, if you'll notice, if paddle velocity does not, occur inside this if statement here, then I just realized we never returned that. That might explain it. So there we go. Now we can go ahead and we go to 107, which is the second error. So that one's right here. So paddle velocity, and we still have the problem of tuple and int, obviously. So now when we go ahead and we check the program and we look at this, we go, all right, what is happening here? There's a lot of things happening. We want to make sure we understand what's going on. Well, we go ahead here and we can see that these two variables are initialized as global variables. We go ahead, we search for paddle 1 velocity. We can see that it is used everywhere in the program, from top to bottom, even up here, right? So if it's everywhere, then why do we need to go ahead and say global over here? So global is essentially, it's almost redundant, since it is defined outside these methods and this is not a class. There is absolutely no need to go ahead and say global paddle 1 velocity comma paddle 2 velocity. So if I were to go ahead and just comment this line out, and if I were to run it, the error I would get would still be the same error. So it's something that we do want to fix, obviously, right? But it's something that's good for you to go ahead and understand try and understand what's going on here. So once these paddles are initialized, the first thing that we go ahead and we do is we call these two helper methods. Now, if we are to go back to our original piece of code that we had before, let me just go ahead, set that to here. Okay, so if we go ahead and we look at our original piece of code, we can notice that the only time paddle 1 or 2 are set at new values is only if it passes the if statement, right? If it does not pass the if statement, then it just won't be reassigned again. So this is something that's quite important for understanding what is going on. So instead of just returning paddle velocity here, we can actually return -8 here in this case, and we can return 8. And what this does is now we can delete all these redundant things. And we don't even need our paddle velocity anymore, because we're no longer actually changing that. All we are doing is assigning the values that they will be changed to, right? Over here, we can just go ahead and return 0 rather than returning paddle velocity, meaning that we no longer need paddle velocity. So we want to make sure when we make these changes, it has to be consistent. It has to be consistent everywhere for us to understand exactly how it works. So I made the changes, but you guys couldn't see it, so I'll give you guys a second to look at this again. The changes I made is now it returns -8 rather than the paddle velocity. So 1 minute for you guys to look over what just happened. Alright, so hopefully you guys were able to, kind of understand what's going on. So I will switch over our screen so you guys can see this. And, we're still getting, obviously, an error here. And this error is still in line 106, and this is none type, meaning that paddle velocity isn't even getting something assigned to it. That's obviously not good. Well, why is this? Well, if we look back at our code, we can notice certain things. So we don't need these highlights anymore because we now know exactly what our problem is, since it's not being unclear or anything like that. So none type. Well, what does none type mean? So I'll just go ahead and get that error back. So into none type. Well, none type means that there is no value assigned, simply put. And when there is no value assigned, obviously it's impossible to go ahead and add it to something or subtract it to something or anything like that. It's impossible to do any calculations. So in the original code that we changed, there had to be something that happened in which we were able to go ahead and make sure that this in fact did not happen. There had to be something that happened where this did not happen in the original code, obviously, because the original code did not have this error. So I will go ahead and bring up the original code for you guys to see, obviously. So that'll be here, and I'll give you guys about a minute to try and troubleshoot this for yourselves before I go ahead and help you guys do that step. Alright, so the difference here is when we go ahead and if we were to go back to our original piece of code, it is always assigning some sort of value to our variable, So when it's assigning this value, right, it's sometimes, it doesn't give us an actual value back. And sometimes when we go ahead and we give it that value in the first place, it's completely blank, There's nothing that we can really do about that, obviously, right? So essentially, we need to think, how can we work around this, right? Well, how we can work around this is we need to think about the logic behind this. If it's always assigning some sort of value, obviously we don't want it to always assign some sort of value. So what we can do is we can create our temporary variable. Temporary variable being a variable that we use simply to filter out other variables. In this case, we can just call it temp velocity. And temp velocity, we'll check if temp velocity is not equal to, I believe it's none type. We'll put that there for now. Obviously, I will fix that. So if temp velocity, then we can go ahead and we can assign paddle to is equal to temp velocity. In that way, if it's not, then it simply won't be reassigned. So again, if you have any questions as to the exact programming words that you need to use in order to make sure your program runs, well, obviously we need to go ahead and we need to think, all right, where's the best place we can find the solution to, and that is Google. So how to check null case in Python. So there is no null. Instead, there's none. So over here, we go ahead, we click on this, we look through this website, and we're just looking for the code here. And in Python and Java, there's nothing here, there's nothing here. So instead, it's just none. So we go back to our code, and obviously, we're going to test none. And it works. It is an actual piece of syntax here. So now that we go ahead and tested, that this is a valid piece of code, we'll just put it through the entire thing. Why not, right? So we want to make sure we change all the correct variables to everything that we need. And we also want to change this as well. And, this is actually pretty much going to be the entire same thing. Except instead of key down, it is key up. Key up. Right? Inside key up, we want to make sure, obviously, everything's working still. So we want to look through it. Seems good, seems good. The logic flows, and I think that, it'll work. So we go back, we run our program, and we want to see, does it work? And we can see that our paddles do work, and there is no error whatsoever. So we did take care of that null case error. So as we can see, there's no error until our score over here. So in ball movement, I believe there's another error we have over here. Left and right score aren't defined. Obviously, this code is something that we're still tweaking, so there's obviously going to be errors from time to time. But we can see that the paddles are working with our new helper methods. So with that, I will go ahead and end the class. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Line Gamer, I really appreciate you going ahead and asking these questions, trying to answer my questions. Obviously, having interaction is great, and when you guys go ahead and do this, makes me happy that you guys obviously get some of these answers correct. Like Line Gamer, you were able to guess that something is not defined, right? And understand that, and obviously we had to try and fix that problem. So I will go ahead and upload the code to the GitHub, and once I upload the code, you guys can copy it for yourselves. Obviously, it's not perfect at the moment, so you can choose whether or not you want to do it or not, but it's completely up to your choice. If you want to go ahead and follow with the different changes that we're making, then it's a good idea to go ahead and copy the recent code, play with it yourself, try and see if you can do any cool things with it. So with that, I have nothing else for today's class. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now. If not, I will see you guys next week. Thank you. Alright, it looks like no one has any questions, so I will see you guys next week. Thank you for watching.